Hey everyone. So, I need to tell you about the absolute wildest client situation I've ever dealt with in my 7 years working in import logistics. And trust me, I've seen some things. But this takes the cake. My name's Sarah, I'm 32, and I work as a customer service specialist for a customs brokerage firm here in Los Angeles. If you don't know what that means, basically, I help businesses import goods into the United States from overseas. I'm the person who makes sure all the paperwork is filed correctly, that customs gets paid what they need to get paid, and that my client's stuff doesn't end up stuck at the port for weeks because somebody forgot to check a box on Form 3461 or whatever. It's not glamorous. I spend most of my days staring at spreadsheets and HS codes. Those are the tariff classification codes that tell customs what something is and how much duty to charge on it. I talk to frustrated clients. I explain regulations that most people don't care about until they suddenly affect them, and I navigate a bureaucratic system that would make a DMV look streamlined. But you know what? I'm good at my job. I know the regulations inside and out. I keep up with policy changes. I respond to emails promptly. I explain things clearly. And I genuinely try to help my clients save money and avoid problems wherever legally possible. Most of my clients appreciate that. They understand that I'm on their side, helping them navigate a complicated system. But this story is about a client who thought the rules didn't apply to her. A client who thought that being important meant she could negotiate with the federal government. A client who cost herself tens of thousands of dollars because she refused to listen to me. Let me tell you about Diane. So Diane, not her real name, obviously, had been my client for about 2.5 years. She ran an online boutique that sold home decor and furniture. One of those Instagram aesthetic businesses with the white walls and the plants and the minimalist everything. She sourced most of her inventory from manufacturers in Asia, particularly China and Vietnam, and she was doing pretty well for herself. We're talking multiple shipments per year, millions of dollars in goods annually. When she first came on as a client, I thought she was going to be fine. A little demanding. Maybe. She had this habit of emailing me at like 10 p.m. and then calling me at 8:30 the next morning asking why I hadn't responded yet. But nothing I couldn't handle. I've dealt with way worse. She paid her invoices on time, her shipments were relatively straightforward, and we developed what I thought was a decent working relationship. Professional, efficient, mostly drama-free. I handled probably 40 or 50 shipments for her over those 2 years. Holiday inventory, new product launches, restock orders. Everything went smoothly. Her goods cleared customs without issues. She never got hit with penalties. And I made sure she understood exactly what she was paying for and why. Then January of last year happened, and everything went to hell. You might remember, and I'm trying not to get political here because that's not what this is about, but there were some pretty significant tariff increases that went into effect on imported goods from certain countries. This had been in the news for months. Industry publications had been covering it extensively. I'd sent multiple emails to all my clients back in November and December warning them this was coming and explaining how it might impact their costs. I'd specifically called Diane in mid-December. I remember because it was right before Christmas and I was trying to wrap up loose ends before taking a few days off. I explained that her typical shipments would likely see a substantial increase in duty costs once the new rates kicked in. I walked her through some rough estimates based on her usual order volumes. I even suggested some strategies she might consider. Ordering larger quantities before the deadline to stockpile inventory at the old rates, or diversifying her sourcing to include countries not affected by the increases. She'd seemed distracted during that call. A lot of, yeah, okay responses. She told me she'd think about it and then pretty much ended the conversation. I documented everything in my notes, sent her a follow-up email summarizing what we'd discussed, and moved on. I'd done my due diligence. The ball was in her court. Fast forward to late January. Diane had a shipment arriving. A full container of her usual mix of decorative items, textiles, some accent furniture. Standard order for her. I pulled up the shipment details on a Tuesday morning, ran the calculations with the new tariff rates, and my stomach dropped. The tariff bill was $197,450. just in tariffs, not including our service fees, not including ocean freight, not including port charges, just the money owed to U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Now, to be clear, this was a huge shipment. We're talking about a 40-foot container packed full of goods that she'd retail for probably close to $2 million. So the duty wasn't out of proportion to the value of the shipment. This is just what happens when tariff rates go from 10, 15% to 35, 40% overnight. But I knew this was going to be a difficult conversation. I put together a detailed breakdown email. I itemized everything: what the goods were, what tariff classifications they fell under, what the old rates had been versus the new rates, and what the total came to. I made it crystal clear that this was the amount she'd owe to customs, not to us. I even included links to the official tariff schedule on the CBP website so she could verify everything herself. I reread that email probably 3 times before I sent it, making sure my tone was professional, that I was explaining everything clearly, and that I wasn't coming across as apologetic for something that wasn't my fault or my company's fault. Then I hit send and waited. 30 minutes later, my phone rang. Diane's name popped up on the caller ID. I took a breath and answered. "Hi, Diane. This is Sarah. This has to be wrong." Her voice was tight, clipped. "There is absolutely no way I owe almost $200,000 in tariffs. That's completely insane." "I know it's a shock," I said, pulling up her file on my computer screen. "But I can walk you through exactly how we got to that number. The tariff rates increased significantly on the categories you're importing, and I don't need you to walk me through anything. I need you to fix it. I've been working with your company for years. I'm one of your biggest clients. What can you do to get this reduced?" I paused. "Diane, I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. You're asking what we can do to reduce the tariff amount?" "Yes, obviously." "Diane," I chose my words carefully, "my company doesn't collect tariffs. The U.S. government does. These fees go directly to Customs and Border Protection. We're just facilitating the payment and preparing the paperwork. We don't have any authority to change or negotiate these rates." "Then talk to whoever you need to talk to at Customs and work something out. Tell them I'm a regular importer, that I've never had problems before. There has to be some kind of exception process." I actually had to put her on mute for a second because I could feel myself getting frustrated and I needed to collect myself. "Diane," I said, unmuting, "tariffs are set by federal law. They're not negotiable on a case-by-case basis. It would be like me trying to negotiate your federal income taxes. The rates are what they are, and they apply to everyone importing these categories of goods." "That's ridiculous. I didn't agree to these rates." "When you import goods into the U.S., you're subject to U.S. customs law," I explained, keeping my voice level. "And we did notify you about these changes. Multiple times. I called you specifically about this in December. And we sent several emails before that." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing. "Well, I don't remember that conversation," she finally said. "And even if you mentioned it, I didn't understand it would be this much. You need to figure out a solution. Can't your company cover this? Or split it with me as a gesture of goodwill since I've been such a loyal client?" And that's when I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. It just came out. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to regain my composure. "But you're asking my company to pay $200,000 in government fees on your behalf? Or even half of that? Diane, that's not how any of this works." "Then what exactly am I paying you for?" Diane's voice had gone up about an octave. "You're paying us to handle the customs clearance process," I said, and I could hear the edge creeping into my own voice now. "We prepare and file all the necessary documentation. We coordinate with the Port Authority and transportation providers. We classify your goods correctly to ensure you're not overpaying or underpaying duties. And we make sure everything clears customs legally and efficiently. We've done all of that for this shipment. But we cannot and will not pay your tax obligations for you. That's not a service we offer to anyone." "This is unbelievable," she said. I'm going to pay $200,000 for nothing. You're not paying for nothing. You're paying import duties on goods you're bringing into the country to sell for a profit. This is a cost of doing business in international trade. Don't lecture me about business, she snapped. I've been running my company successfully for 5 years. I know how business works. And I know that good vendors work with their clients when problems come up, not just shrug and say, not my problem. I took a deep breath. Diane, I understand you're frustrated. I really do. These tariff increases have hit a lot of our clients hard. But this isn't something we can solve for you. If you want to discuss strategies for managing these costs going forward, maybe adjusting your sourcing, changing your order patterns, or looking at different product categories, I'm happy to help with that. But the duties on this current shipment are what they are. I need to speak to your supervisor, she said. Of course, I can have someone from management reach out to you. But I want to set realistic expectations. They're going to tell you the same thing I'm telling you. Because the facts don't change. We'll see about that, she said, and hung up. I sat there for a minute, just staring at my phone. My heart was pounding. My face felt hot. I've dealt with difficult clients before. It's part of the job. But something about Diane's sheer refusal to accept reality was getting under my skin. I documented everything in our CRM system. The entire conversation. Everything she'd said. Everything I'd said. Because I had a feeling this wasn't over. Sure enough, about 2 hours later, I got a calendar invite from my CEO's assistant. Subject: Urgent client matter, Diane Morrison account. My CEO, Jennifer, is this incredibly calm, professional woman in her mid-50s who's been in the customs brokerage industry since before I was born. She's seen literally everything. Nothing rattles her. The meeting was scheduled for first thing the next morning, which told me this was serious. When I walked into Jennifer's office the next day, she had a printed email in front of her. I could see Diane's name in the header. So, Jennifer said, gesturing for me to sit down. Diane submitted a formal complaint about you yesterday evening. She claims you were rude, dismissive, and failed to adequately warn her about tariff changes that significantly impact her business. She also says you refused to help her find solutions and that you laughed at her concerns. My stomach dropped. I did laugh, I admitted. Once, when she asked if we could pay her tariff bill for her, or split it with her. It was such an absurd request that I had a moment of, I don't know, shock? I apologized immediately and explained why that wasn't possible. Jennifer nodded. Walk me through the whole conversation. So I did. I went through everything, referencing the notes I'd taken in our system. I pulled up the emails I'd sent Diane about the tariff changes, the general notifications in November, the more specific ones in December, the call notes from our December conversation. Jennifer listened to everything, occasionally making notes, her expression neutral. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. You handled this correctly, she finally said. You gave her advance warning, you provided clear information, and you explained her options. You can't force a client to pay attention to information they don't want to hear. I felt a wave of relief. That said, Jennifer continued, she wants to speak with someone who has authority to actually help her, so I'm going to take over the account communication from here. Let's see if she's more willing to accept reality when it comes from the CEO. Do you think she will be? I asked. Jennifer gave me a wry smile. No, but we'll give her what she asked for. Jennifer called Diane that afternoon. I wasn't on the call. Jennifer wanted to handle it one-on-one, but she filled me in afterward. According to Jennifer, Diane had started off trying to be more measured and professional, probably figuring that sweet-talking the CEO would get her further than yelling had gotten her with me. She'd explained that she valued her relationship with our company, that she'd always been satisfied with our services in the past, but that this tariff situation was putting her business in a difficult position and she really needed us to be flexible and work with her. Jennifer had listened patiently and then basically given Diane the same information I had. The tariffs were government-mandated, non-negotiable, and had to be paid before the goods could be released from customs. Our company had no authority to reduce, waive, or pay those fees on her behalf. Diane had apparently kept pushing, cycling through various arguments. She'd been a loyal client. This was going to hurt her business. Surely there was something we could do. What about a payment plan? What about reducing our service fees to offset the tariff costs, etc.? Jennifer had remained firm. We could certainly discuss payment terms for our fees if that would help. But the tariffs themselves had to be paid in full to customs. That was non-negotiable. That's when Diane's professional veneer had cracked, according to Jennifer. She'd raised her voice, accused us of not caring about our clients, made some vague threats about leaving negative reviews and reporting us to someone. It wasn't clear who, since we hadn't done anything wrong. Jennifer, to her eternal credit, had stayed calm throughout. "Diane," she'd said, "I understand you're upset, and that's valid. These tariff increases have impacted a lot of businesses, but our company cannot and will not break federal customs law to accommodate you, and we're certainly not going to absorb $200,000 in your tax obligations. If you'd like to continue working with us, we're happy to do so, but you'll need to accept the reality of the current tariff situation. Alternatively, if you feel you can manage the import process more cost-effectively on your own, you're welcome to pursue that option. We'll provide you with all the documentation you need." And that, apparently, is when Diane made her decision. About an hour after Jennifer's call with Diane, I got an email from her. Subject line: "Termination of services. Effective immediately." I'm not going to lie, reading that email was kind of satisfying in a petty way. Diane had written what can only be described as a melodramatic breakup letter. She went on for several paragraphs about how we had failed her during a critical time for her business, how we'd been inflexible and unhelpful, and how she'd always felt like she was just a number to us rather than a valued partner. She claimed that after years of loyalty and thousands of dollars in fees, we'd shown our true colors by refusing to support her during a challenging situation. She announced that she would be taking control of her import process and handling everything herself going forward, and that she would never work with people like us who treat their customers like this. The email ended with a demand that we immediately provide her with all documentation related to her current shipment so she could transition to self-management. I forwarded it to Jennifer with a note. "Well, that's that, I guess." Jennifer's response was quick. "Provide her with everything she needs. Be professional and courteous. Let's make this easy for her." So I did. I spent the next couple of hours compiling every piece of information Diane would need: commercial invoices, packing lists, bill of lading, ISF filing confirmations, our preliminary customs entry paperwork, tariff classifications, everything. I put it all in an organized folder, wrote her a brief professional email explaining what each document was and where she'd need to submit it, and included contact information for U.S. Customs in case she had questions we couldn't answer. I even included some resources: links to CBP's website, guides for first-time self-filers, common pitfalls to avoid. I wasn't being sarcastic or passive-aggressive. I genuinely did want to make this transition as smooth as possible for her, both because it was the professional thing to do and because, honestly, I felt a little bad for her. She was clearly in over her head and didn't realize it yet. I sent the email, wished her luck, and that was it. Diane was no longer my client. I'm not going to pretend I didn't think about Diane over the next few months. I was genuinely curious how it would go for her. Handling customs clearance yourself isn't impossible, but it's complicated, especially if you're dealing with large shipments and complex tariff classifications. There are so many places where you can make mistakes: using the wrong HS codes, miscalculating duties, missing filing deadlines, not understanding when additional documentation is required. And if you screw up, customs will catch it eventually. And then you're looking at penalties, delays, possibly even having your goods seized if they think you were trying to commit fraud. I figured Diane would probably struggle for a bit, realize she'd bitten off more than she could chew, and quietly hire another customs broker. Maybe not us. She'd burned that bridge pretty thoroughly. But someone. I mentioned this to Jennifer a few weeks after Diane had left. We'd been doing our quarterly account review, and Diane's departure had come up as a line item in our client retention metrics. "Do you think she'll be okay?" I asked. Jennifer had shrugged. "Honestly? Probably not. But sometimes people need to learn lessons the hard way." "Do you think she'll come back?" "To us? No, she'd be too embarrassed. She made too big of a scene." Jennifer was half right. 4 months went by. 4 entire months where I didn't hear a single word from Diane. And then, on a random Thursday afternoon in May, I got an email. From Diane. Subject line, "Reconnecting, import partnership opportunity." I literally said, "What the fuck," out loud at my desk. My coworker in the next cubicle looked over. "You okay?" "Diane just emailed me," I said. "Wait, Diane? Your nightmare client, Diane?" "Yep." "Oh, this is going to be good." She wasn't wrong. I opened the email and it was surreal. The tone was completely different from her last communication. Friendly, casual, like we were old colleagues catching up. "Hi, Sarah. I hope this email finds you well and that business has been good for you. I know it's been a little while since we last worked together, but I wanted to reach out and see if you might have bandwidth to take on some import work for me again. I've been managing my logistics independently, but I think there could be real value in partnering with your team again. I've always appreciated your expertise, and I think we could accomplish great things together. Let me know if you'd be open to discussing this. Looking forward to hearing from you." I read it 3 times. No apology. No acknowledgement of how things had ended. No mention of the complaint she'd filed against me or the nasty email she'd sent. Just, "Hey, want to work together again?" The audacity was genuinely impressive. I immediately forwarded it to Jennifer with the subject line, "You need to see this." She called me about 5 minutes later. I could hear her trying not to laugh. "Is she serious?" Jennifer asked. "I think so." "What do you think happened?" "My guess?" I said. "She tried to do it herself, screwed something up royally, and ended up paying way more than she would have if she'd just stayed with us and paid the damn tariffs." "That's exactly what I think too," Jennifer said. "Okay, here's what we're doing. You're not responding. I'll handle this." "Really?" "Really. You've dealt with enough of her nonsense." I was honestly relieved. Jennifer's response to Diane was a masterclass in professional, polite rejection. She thanked Diane for reaching out and for her kind words about our services. She acknowledged that we'd worked together successfully in the past and appreciated Diane's consideration in reaching out. And then she very professionally said no. She explained that due to current client load and resource allocation, we unfortunately wouldn't be able to take on Diane's account at this time. She wished Diane continued success with her business and suggested she might find other qualified customs brokers through the National Customs Brokers and Forwarders Association of America. It was polite, it was professional, and it was absolutely final. Diane responded within an hour. This time, the friendly veneer started to crack. She asked if we could discuss this further and mentioned that she'd be willing to commit to a longer-term contract if that helped with our capacity concerns. Jennifer held firm. She reiterated that we weren't in a position to take on her account and encouraged her to explore other options. Then Diane sent a longer email. She CC'd me on this one, which was a choice. In this email, she finally acknowledged, sort of, what had happened. She said she'd attempted to manage the import process independently over the past few months, but had encountered some unexpected complications with customs documentation and duty calculations that resulted in higher costs than anticipated. Still no actual apology for how she'd treated us. No, "I'm sorry for accusing you of incompetence," or "I was wrong to expect you to pay my bills." Just a vague admission that maybe things hadn't gone as smoothly as she'd hoped. She said she now had a deeper appreciation for the value that experienced customs brokers bring to the process and really hoped we could move past our previous difficulties. Jennifer's response was even shorter this time. She appreciated Diane's transparency, but the decision stood. We wouldn't be resuming service, and that was it. That was the last we heard from her. Of course, I had to know what had actually happened during those 4 months. I'm only human. I didn't do anything creepy, I just asked around a little bit. The customs brokerage industry is surprisingly small in any given port city, and people talk. Turns out, Diane had indeed tried to handle customs clearance herself for that first shipment that had triggered the whole meltdown. She'd filed the entry paperwork, but she'd misclassified about 60% of her goods. Used the wrong HS codes, which is a super common mistake for people who don't do this professionally. These codes are incredibly specific and can be confusing as hell if you don't know what you're doing. Because of the misclassification, customs flagged her entire shipment for physical inspection. That's basically the worst-case scenario. It means your container gets pulled aside, physically examined, and sits at the port while customs goes through everything and verifies your declarations. This process took 3 weeks. 3 weeks that her container sat at the port, racking up storage fees every single day. When customs finished their inspection, they recalculated her duties based on the correct classifications. And because she'd gotten it wrong initially, even though it was clearly a mistake and not intentional fraud, they hit her with penalties. Not huge ones, but like $8,000 in penalty fees on top of everything else. So let's do the math. She owed about $200,000 in tariffs, which she would have owed regardless. She paid probably another $8,000, $10,000 in penalties for misclassification. And she paid somewhere around $15,000, $20,000 in port storage fees and expedited processing charges trying to rush everything through once she realized how badly she'd messed up. Total? Probably close to $235,000, $240,000. And that's not even counting the lost revenue from having her inventory stuck at the port for 3 weeks during what should have been peak selling season. So she didn't just pay the $200,000 in tariffs she'd been so upset about. She paid more than that. Plus, she lost weeks of potential sales. Plus, she had to deal with all the stress and headache of trying to navigate a system she didn't understand. All because she refused to accept that sometimes you just have to pay what you owe. For her second shipment, she apparently hired another customs broker. I don't know which one, and honestly, I don't care. But I heard through the grapevine that she'd caused problems with them too. Something about trying to get them to reduce their fees because of all the issues with the first shipment that were entirely her own fault. I don't know if they fired her or if she left, but by the time she came crawling back to us, she'd apparently burned through at least 2 other service providers. I want to talk about why Jennifer made the decision to not take Diane back, because I think it's actually an important business lesson that more people need to understand. It wasn't about revenge. I want to be really clear about that. Jennifer isn't petty. This wasn't about punishing Diane for being difficult or making her pay for treating us badly. It was about recognizing that Diane would never be a good client. She'd shown us exactly who she was. Someone who doesn't take responsibility for her own decisions, who expects special treatment, who lashes out at service providers when reality doesn't match her expectations, and who views professional relationships as entirely transactional and one-sided. Even if we'd taken her back, what would have happened the next time there was a problem? The next time there was an unexpected fee or a regulatory change she didn't like? She'd be right back to blaming us, demanding we eat costs that aren't ours to pay, filing complaints, sending nasty emails. Jennifer explained it to me like this. Sarah, you know how much revenue Diane brought in annually? About $40,000 in service fees. You know how much time she cost us? Between managing her expectations, handling her complaints, dealing with her demands, and the hours you spent on that last incident alone? Easily $40,000 worth of management time and emotional labor. She was basically a break-even client at best, and that was before she turned hostile. We're literally better off without her. And she was absolutely right. We reallocated the time I'd been spending on Diane's account to 3 smaller clients who were growing their businesses. All 3 of them were pleasant to work with, paid their bills without drama, respected our expertise, and understood that we were partners in their success. Not miracle workers who could override federal law or absorb their tax obligations. Within 6 months, those three accounts combined had replaced Diane's revenue. And I was spending maybe a quarter of the time managing them compared to what I'd spent managing her. Better clients, less stress, same revenue. Why would we ever take Diane back? I think the reason this whole situation has stuck with me, the reason I'm telling this story, is because it perfectly illustrates this particular type of entitled behavior that seems to be getting more and more common. This idea that if you just push hard enough, demand loudly enough, or claim to be important enough, somehow the rules that apply to everyone else shouldn't apply to you. But here's the thing about importing goods into the United States. It doesn't matter how long you've been in business. It doesn't matter how much money you spend or how important you think you are. The tariff schedule applies to everyone equally. That's literally the point. And the people who work in this industry, we're not keeping these rules in place because we're mean or because we don't care about your business. We're following them because they're the law, and because helping you break them or circumvent them would put our licenses and our livelihoods at risk. When Diane demanded that we cover her tariffs or find her a discount, she was essentially asking us to commit fraud. Maybe she didn't understand that's what she was asking. Honestly, I don't think she did. But that's what it amounted to. Misrepresenting the value of goods, hiding tariff obligations, making false declarations to customs. These are federal crimes. They can result in massive fines, seized merchandise, criminal charges, and permanent loss of import privileges. No legitimate customs broker is going to risk all of that just because a client doesn't want to pay their legal obligations. I think Diane genuinely believed that being a client for a couple of years gave her some kind of leverage or special status. Like we owed her something beyond the professional services we were already providing. But that's not how business works. At least not healthy business relationships. Yes, we value long-term clients. Yes, we go above and beyond for people who've worked with us for years. But that means things like priority response times, occasional flexibility on payment terms, proactive communication about potential issues. It doesn't mean breaking the law or paying your bills for you. The thing that gets me, the thing that still baffles me when I think about this whole situation, is how much money Diane wasted because of pride and stubbornness. If she'd just accepted the tariff bill, paid it, and moved on, she'd have saved herself probably $40,000, $50,000 in unnecessary costs. She'd still be working with a company that knew her products, understood her timelines, and had a solid track record of smooth, efficient clearances for her. Instead, her ego and her sense of entitlement cost her tens of thousands of dollars, damaged her reputation in a pretty small industry, and left her scrambling to find brokers willing to work with her after she'd already burned multiple bridges. And for what? Because she didn't want to accept that sometimes you just have to pay what you owe? I don't tell this story to mock Diane, even though I know some of it comes across that way. I tell it because there's a genuine lesson here for anyone running a business or working with service providers. The professionals you hire to help you navigate complex systems, whether that's customs brokers, accountants, lawyers, consultants, whatever, we're not your adversaries. We're not trying to make your life harder or squeeze extra money out of you. We're trying to help you succeed within the constraints of existing laws and regulations. When we tell you something isn't possible, or that there's a cost you can't avoid, we're not being difficult. We're being honest. And when you treat those professionals with disrespect, make unreasonable demands, or refuse to accept reality because it's inconvenient, you're only hurting yourself. Diane learned that lesson the expensive way. I hope whoever's handling her imports now is getting paid extremely well. They're going to need it.